Welcome back to The Explainer. Today, we're diving into Singapore's highly technocratic, skills-first approach to the AI labor transition. We're going to explore their incredibly unique blueprint for the future of work to see exactly how a nation attempts to outrun the machine. Here is our roadmap for today. We're going to cover engineering the transition, the calibration blueprint, outrunning the machine, the meta lever, the bear case, and finally, what travels. Kicking things off with Section 1, engineer the transition, the global contrast. So, when facing massive technological shifts like AI, different regions rely on their gut instincts, right? Europe goes straight for rules and regulations. The Nordics expand their safety nets. America bets everything on sheer economic growth, and the Gulf leans hard into capital. But Singapore? Their instinct is totally different. They want to literally engineer every single lever at the exact same time. And here is the crucial point. Singapore doesn't believe in silver bullets. As the source material puts it perfectly, this is the response of a state that trusts its own competence way more than it trusts any single idea. It's not about gambling on one grand ideological bet. It's a mindset built entirely around absolute precision and calibration.
Which leads us perfectly into Section 2, the Calibration Blueprint, instruments for every lever.
It is truly incredible how comprehensive this dashboard of policies is. They have built a well-funded, specifically named instrument for pretty much every socioeconomic lever you can think of, and they tune them constantly. For skills, you've got SkillsFuture. For income, there's workfare. Savings and assets are tied into the mandatory Central Provident Fund, or CPF. Wages are managed through the progressive wage model. And governing the whole shebang is a national AI strategy steered by an AI council that's actually chaired by the Prime Minister himself. The source describes this as a govern your way through it model. The ethos here is heavily anti-dependency and fiercely pro-work. Instead of substituting for work, programs like workfare and the progressive wage model are explicitly designed to reward it, tying pay directly to productivity. They completely reject the idea of a blunt national minimum wage. It's all about pairing these massive investments in people with the strict insistence that any support remains active and conditional. Moving on to Part 3. Outrunning the Machine, the SkillsFuture Staircase. Let's look at their flagship initiative, SkillsFuture. This treats lifelong learning like a literal staircase. At age 25, a citizen gets an account loaded with heavily subsidized courses. Hit age 40, and the Level Up program kicks in, dropping a massive $4,000 credit top-up into the account. The logic here is brilliant. You just never stop climbing. You move up the skill ladder faster than automation can eat the rungs below you. The goal isn't to protect your old job, it's to obsessively prepare you for the new one. But let's be real. How do you actually afford the time off to retrain? Well, that brings us to the $3,000 question. That is the monthly mid-career training allowance given for full-time study. And coming in 2026, there is also a flat $300 monthly allowance for part-time courses. This directly attacks the number one reason people don't retrain. They simply can't afford to stop working. This allowance replaces a chunk of lost income, so making that continuous climb up the staircase is actually doable. But they aren't just focused on the human side. They're engineering the AI side at the very same time. Think about it. Singapore has almost zero land and incredibly tight electricity limits. Honestly, that should disqualify them from being an AI hub right out of the gate. But they treat those massive constraints as a design challenge, not a final verdict. They've poured over $1 billion into public AI research. They're building homegrown open-source models like Sea Lion and Moralion. They're lifting data center moratoriums by mandating strict advanced cooling. Plus, they're routing capital outward globally through sovereign wealth funds like Temasek and GIC. They are literally trying to run both halves of the transition, accelerating the AI and upgrading the human at the exact same time. Which brings us to Section 4, the meta lever, state capacity. Now, at first glance, this might look a lot like the Nordic system, but there is a profound philosophical split here. The Nordics rely on a generous, unconditional income floor to catch people if they get displaced. Singapore, they rely on a conditional work-tied floor. They are pouring all their conviction into relentless skills training and the sheer, unmatched administrative capacity of the state itself to run this incredibly complex machine. And this is such an absolutely vital takeaway. Execution is a policy variable. Think about that. You could take the exact same policy blueprint, hand it to a high-capacity state, then hand it to a low-capacity state, and you are going to get completely different outcomes. Singapore is living proof that how well you run a policy matters just as much as which policy you actually choose. But what happens when things don't go perfectly? Let's look at Section 5, the bear case, the limits of the blueprint. We really have to be objective and look at the deepest worries surrounding this whole strategy. What if AI capabilities accelerate faster than humans can actually learn? Because if that happens, no amount of financial allowance is going to cover the gap between how fast you climb and how fast those rungs disappear. Does the staircase eventually just turn into a treadmill that keeps speeding up? And according to the source material, we're already seeing some early hints of friction. Actually, Singapore's own training participation rate recently dropped to a near-decade low. Officials are openly worrying about the disconnect between people getting these upgraded skills and actually landing the jobs. Plus, a pure work plus reskill model has a pretty glaring blind spot. It struggles to support people who just don't have a job to reskill into. Recently, they quietly introduced a new temporary unemployment payment. And that's a pretty revealing admission that even a highly engineered system of self-reliance ultimately needs some sort of basic cushion for those who genuinely cannot keep up. Finally, let's wrap up with Section 6, What Travels? Exporting the model. So, what parts of this can other countries actually use? There's a really strict divide between what travels and what doesn't. On the exportable side, sure, governments can easily copy the literal instruments, the mechanics of a lifelong learning account, the skill-linked wage ladders, the reward for work designs. But the non-exportable side, that's the meta lever. Other nations simply cannot legislate decades of political continuity, the compact scale of a city-state, or Singapore's unmatched civil service execution into existence overnight. The machinery is easy to copy. The mechanic who runs it, not so much. Which leaves us with this profound final thought to chew on. Even if you flawlessly execute a skills-first strategy, can a model so heavily dependent on unmatched state competence ever successfully protect workers in the rest of the world? Or is the AI labor transition ultimately a test that only the engineers can pass? Thanks so much for exploring this blueprint with me today. Keep asking those big questions, and I'll catch you in the next explainer.